Welcome to Get Associated with Cathie. Thank you guys so much for joining me. We have been talking about the 1-year anniversary of Harvey this month, and it was such a tragedy. But one of the things that came through was the light of just having the community involvement and the community awareness and just such great volunteerism that came out of that. Today, I welcome two of our mayors from the area. So Pat Hallisey with League City and Mike Foreman with Friendswood. Welcome.
Thanks, Cathie.
Welcome.
Great to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you guys, and I just want to kind of give a brief overview of what you guys have been doing as mayors and what your community's like. So, Mike, why don't we start with you with Friendswood? You've been the mayor for the past about 5 months or so. So what has it been like to transition from city council to being the mayor role?
Well, it's been most days pretty good, Cathie. I enjoy it a lot. You know, we have a magnificent city staff of about 230 people that are just outstanding at their job, and it's been fun. I didn't realize, I don't think that I would be spending as much time at City Hall as I have been, but I've probably spent more time in City Hall in the 5 months I've been mayor than I did the entire 2 years I was a city councilman. But it's been great, enjoying it quite a bit. And
I'll take a moment to remind our viewers that your role is a volunteer role, correct?
Exactly. So I think a lot of people don't really realize that mayor and city councilmen in Friendswood don't get paid. We're volunteers, just like a lot of the other folks in Friendswood that volunteer for our various committees. And
yes, you know, mayors being volunteers, I feel like they have so much on their shoulders, and as citizens and residents, we expect so much from you guys, and we forget to take a step back and say that, hey, you guys are doing this on a voluntary basis. So kudos to both of you guys for everything that you do for your communities. Pat, you've been a mayor for a little bit longer than Mike. You've been a mayor since 2016. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I was mayor 25 years ago.
So round 2 for you.
Yeah, so it's round 2.
What has it been like coming back to the role?
Well, it changed a lot. We changed our form of government. In the old days, the mayor was the chief administrative officer, chief executive officer, and everybody, in essence, down the chain worked under the mayor. City manager changed that. John runs the day-to-day operations. Mm-hmm. I end up being the face of the city, talking about what's going on in town. I give about 150 speeches a year to homeowners groups. You know, I just, one of the things I ran on was reconnecting the dots between government and the institution of government and the people that it serves. There gets to be a perception out there that we don't serve anybody, but we do. So it's and like Mike, I spend 40 to 50 to 60 to 70 hours a week down there. It just depends on what's going on.
That is some volunteer job.
Well, it is. We're a little different. We do get a penance, mm-hmm. But not much. Trust me, it's not much. But anyway, we don't do it for the money. I'll put it that way. We do it because we accept the challenges of moving a community forward. And let me tell you, Friendswood, League City, Kemah, all across the North End, very exciting times right now.
Yes, they're growing rapidly. Yep. And flourishing during their growth, I would say myself.
Yeah, they are. You know, I tell people I went to League City 45 years ago, and it was a little sleepy town of 5,000 people, and you know, we're somewhere between 105 and 110,000 today, and it's continuing to grow. We have 48% of our land area yet to be developed, the whole southwest side of town. And so we have some challenges, as all cities do. It's not an easy deal. You know, it's funny, I think, and Mike's probably in the same boat. The question we get more than anything else, what are you doing about drainage? You know, 25% of our housing stock was underwater, mm-hmm. and a lot of people are recovered, but many are still trying to recover. So
definitely.
What are we doing about that? And so, yeah, I know you're going to get to that.
We will definitely get to that. But what would you say has been like your greatest accomplishment as a mayor or something that you're just proud of?
Well, I think the first thing I ran on was I got tired of watching the annex on TV. They were punching each other out at council meetings, and there were people coming to the dais to they were unhappy. They were there to articulate their problems, and people would get up and walk out on them because they didn't look like them. Inherently in a democracy, you can't have that. We represent people. We're there to listen. And I was sitting in Texas City with a bunch of guys doing we were plotting and scheming a Catholic men's conference. And the truth is, I sat there and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. You can't complain or be unhappy with something if you're not willing to do something about it. So I called my wife and I said, I'm going to go down and file to run for mayor. You ready for another deal? Well, politics has not always been kind to us. And she said, yes. And I said, well, great. So I went and signed up and ran the kind of campaign that I always wanted to run. Never had a bad word to say about another human being, but talked about what we were going to do. And if there's something that's changed within the city, there is a can-do attitude. There is no more acceptance of the word no. No is just an excuse for people that don't want to find an answer in my book. So, John, we changed city managers. We got the staff headed in the right direction, and our city manager and staff do a marvelous job. No better place that they did that than during Harvey to come to the aid of people that were hurting.
Oh, yes. Amen for sure on that. Mike, one thing that I have really enjoyed about you being mayor, I get to work in Mayor Hallisey's district and be in League City for my 9-to-5 job, but then I get to come home and be part of the Friendswood community. And with you, I don't know if you know this, we had not met before today, but you had invited me to many things because you are amazing at getting on and going in front of the public. And you invited me to our 4th of July celebration. You invited me and my family out for ice cream on Labor Day. And I want to just give you good props for that, because as a young mom in a community, and I grew up in Friendswood, and we have had some great mayors. But to feel that invitation from your community, whether you had shook somebody's hand or not, by going out and working with the technology that we have today through social media and saying, hey, I want you there. I want you to be part of our community. I want you to feel like you know me. You've similarly with the invitations that have been sent out for tomorrow's Chamber of Commerce. A quick plug for that. We'll be there as well. So tomorrow the Chamber of Commerce has a business expo, and it's, Mike Foreman and the Chamber of Commerce want to invite you out to this. And so, first, you've done a great job of that. With that being said, what do you look forward to as a mayor to be able to bring to this community?
Well, thanks, Cathie, first for living in Friendswood, and second for talking about the outreach that we've done. And that kind of came from, I'll talk about that just for a second. That came from when I was first elected. I sat down with the communication director and I said, hey, what's a way that we could kind of get, the mayor's, something from the mayor out to the public? Could I write a blog? Could we put that on our website? And Jeff Newfer,
yes,
he's the one that said, hey, why don't we do videos? Why don't we do Mayor Mike's Minutes, a couple of times a month? And I said, I'm game for anything. So any of that stuff that you've liked and has looked good is all Jeff Newfer. I'm just the front man that, says the words that he puts in front of me mostly. And those things have worked out. And I've been enjoying doing those things. And I do get a lot of positive feedback for that. So thanks. And I think, what we're continuing to do and looking forward to is continuing to be that transparent, try to get as much information out to the folks as we can, because that was one of the things that I heard during the campaign, is that sometimes the city's not as transparent as it could be. And I think a lot of that is because people don't really know where to get the information. They don't know where to look. So if we can just sort of point them to, hey, here's the information that you're looking for. We're not trying to be non-transparent. We're not trying to hide anything, but you just, if I can help a little bit in some way by communicating more to the folks, then I'll continue to do that.
And you have a great communications department who's done a phenomenal job. I get to speak on this because I am a resident, and so signing up during Harvey for the text alert system, it's been great to even get other things. I think there was some sort of gas spill over in an area a couple of days ago, and I was able, or it might have been yesterday, and it was like, hey, avoid this area, or trash pickup, or just any little thing that needed to be conveyed as a resident, has been done very well, I would say.
Well, appreciate it. We're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue, like Mayor Hallisey's already mentioned, we're going to continue to work on drainage, and I'm sure you have more questions about that, but that's one of the things that we're focused on right now is, of course, drainage, and how do we avoid this flooding that has hit us so hard last year? How do we prevent that from happening again?
Wonderful. Mayor Hallisey, in the years to come, what is something that you would like to accomplish as a mayor, hopefully?
Well, when I ran, aside from creating some civility within the institution, which we've done, I talked a great deal about commercial development. And I did that because 82% of the tax funds that come into the city are coming from rooftops, and they're continuing to go up. Businesses and commercial development is sort of like a profit to a city because you don't have to provide the same level of service. Just to break even on a house, the house has to cost about $250,000. Now, our average house cost in town is $350,000. So commercial development is a big part of it. And, we went to Las Vegas 3 times to look at, the retail business, who we could attract to town. And, at the end of the day, after going everywhere and talking about the good things in our community, we decided we were going to take the bull by the horns. We are about to move the Chester Davis Sportsplex from one side of the freeway to 106 acres on the west side, which is going to expand the amount of ball fields, soccer fields for all the kids. That land that we bought 25 years ago for $14,000 an acre from the Butler family is now worth in and around $1 million an acre. We have a mini medical center developing there. Greg Bonin, our state rep, and also a Friendswood resident, carried a bill for us last year in the legislature, and Larry Taylor did in the Senate, to enable us to access the state's portion of motel hotel tax, sales tax, and a few other mixed drinks taxes, which is going to enable us to build that convention center on the site where the Chester Davis Sportsplex was. Plus, we have a private developer who came in who is paying the $32 million to move those ball fields to the other side of the freeway and set them up. They will put in restaurants and entertainment areas in and through there. Even some talk about a semi-pro baseball team right now, much like the Skeeters. So, what happened out of our trips is we found somebody that could do what we would like to have done, and that's, come in and do something on a tract of land. And, of course, UTMB was expanding like crazy at the time. What land they didn't buy up, this development group bought up on the east side of the freeway. And, of course, the 106 acres that the ball fields are going to on the west side was on the north side of where the Grand Parkway was coming through, which is a whole nother issue that would take years to get through. But we're unhappy that everything is stalled on that Grand Parkway because we need that. Not only I-45 with the expansion, but 65% of our working population goes to the northwest corner of Harris County. 2 objectives there. One, how to get them there quickly. The Grand Parkway would have helped. And the second is, how do we get those people who are paying those sustainable incomes to come down and open shop on our west side, southwest side, where we have all this room? And we thought the Grand Parkway offered us great opportunity for economic development. So those are the challenges that we're up against. Of course, flooding is bad. I keep going back to that. But people come to me and say, we want the ditches, we want this and that. And at the same time, I'm saying to them, we have to do commercial development so that we have the money to go do the flooding issues that you're concerned about. Mike and I both sit on a committee that's dealing with Clear Creek. You know, we could all have, and I've been to his drainage group up in Friendswood. We have people that go to it. We have people that go to the Clear Creek watershed. I think both cities do a great job of getting runoff to the creek, but it comes down the creek, it hits Clear Lake, which is subject to tidal flows, and if the tide is coming in, the water stops and starts to spread out, which is where a great deal of our flooding comes from. As Mike knows,
Well, we have some exciting things to talk about on the drainage and the
Yes.
flooding and all those issues, and we're also going to recap what happened in your two communities, and these gentlemen live in their communities, so we're going to see how they were personally affected during the storms of Hurricane Harvey when we get back on Get Associated with Cathie. Welcome back, and thank you guys for joining me. If you're just tuning in, we're talking to Pat Hallisey, mayor of League City, as well as Mike Foreman, who is the mayor of Friendswood. Thank you both for joining me. And we have been talking about kind of what's going on in your city, what you're working on in growth. I think a lot of this growth, and we talked about a little bit about the drainage and things that are going on, they all kind of derived from a year ago whenever we sat through pretty much the worst storm that I think either of our cities have seen. And definitely, at least during my time, I know that I've been in Friendswood my entire life, and we had never seen anything like that. I think Alicia came through, and what else did we have? We had Ike, and nothing compared to
Claudette, 42 inches. That was a bad one.
So I think during Harvey, what did Friendswood get? 51? Is that right?
51 inches.
51. How much did League City get? Do you know?
55 to 60 is what they're telling me.
Just incredible amount of rain, and and it just destroyed us. It reminded me, although I think some things were kind of a little bit better, but the one, and I'm going to forget the name now that I'm trying to remember it, but the one that went off and then came back and said, haha, just kidding, I'm going to continue to, that was back in 2000 and, was it 2001?
Allison.
Allison. So that one was, a doozy for us, but nothing prepared us, I feel like, for Harvey and the effects of it. So if you guys don't mind, I'll start with Mike. If you want to share a personal story, kind of what your family went through during Harvey.
Well, I'll tell you, the short answer is my house flooded during Harvey, and so we've been spending this past year rebuilding, and we just literally finished the rebuild process at the beginning of August, so it was almost a year. And I said, it feels like I could have torn my house down completely and rebuilt it in a year if I could get the contractors out, but that was the problem was, we had 2,700 homes flooded in Friendswood. That's like Pat said, it's about 25% of our population was flooded. If you weren't flooded, you definitely knew somebody that was flooded. About everybody in Friendswood was involved in the recovery. And if you weren't, receiving help, you were giving help. So it was just, while I'm thinking about it, I'll put a plug in for flood insurance because, I was not required to have flood insurance in my neighborhood. And in 2001, you mentioned Allison. When Allison came in and flooded my cul-de-sac, and I kind of woke up and said, well, wait a minute, maybe there is something to this flood insurance. And since 2001, I've had flood insurance, and I'm glad that I did, so.
And if you're not in a flood zone, it's not that expensive.
Yeah, get flood
ACU,
insurance.
I'll go ahead and, since you plugged flood insurance, I'll plug ACU of Texas. We do have an insurance division, and we're able to quote from all the major carriers. So call us up, and we will take care of you. And yes, pay that $300. And if you are in a flood zone now, I know that there might be some changes coming up in the next year. But
yeah, even if you're not in a floodplain, you're one big tree fall away from a tree falling across a creek, blocking that creek and backing the water flow up, and all of a sudden, hey, the water rose up higher than you ever expected it to. So, it's a great investment for the payout. I'll tell you that. It was
for sure.
So glad that we had it for my home, for the recovery efforts that we went through.
Well, congratulations on finishing your build out. I know so many people that aren't finished and they're still working. Like you said, the contractors are so backed up. We had Scott Short on here last week, and he's with he's our mortgage broker, and he lives in Mayor Hallisey's neighborhood, which I know you had an incredible experience of flooding, and he was talking about your area and what it did. And I think he said, Mayor Hallisey got about this much water, but I got about this much water. And it was hard. It's hard. He's still working on. He was almost finished, I think.
Well, they had down at he lives down the street, and we live off the creek. Scott had it bad. They maybe had 8 or 9 feet in their houses. I, on the other hand, we got about 18 inches. And, of course, toward the end of that, I had some health problems, ended up at the hospital, ended up in Houston, lost a leg and everything else. But it was my fault. But the golden parachute in that deal and the sweet part where God was so good to me, I just have marvelous friends who, while I was in the hospital for 3 months, showed up at the house, and they mucked it, they cleaned it, they put it back together so that the day that Janice came to get me to get out of the hospital, we had a place to live. And I'm telling you, I just was so lucky. And I want to kind of piggyback on Mike's comments about, because we were exactly what you're talking about. We weren't required to have flood insurance. We'd always had it, but all of a sudden we didn't. And we said, why do we need flood insurance? We've been here 31 years. We've never been flooded. And lo and behold, we got flooded and we had no flood insurance. So, we had to make do with what we had. God was good to us, and I'm telling you, our friends were good. And the house got rebuilt, and I tell them every time I see any of it, looks better than it did the day we bought it, and it does. So, we all have and we had that distribution center up in League City at the old Kroger on the freeway. The generosity of people within this county is enormous. When people are hurting, they all came forward to help. The generosity of people across this country, I bet we had 100 tractor-trailer trucks that came anywhere from Maine to Washington State to Washington, D.C., to New England, to Georgia, Florida, bringing supplies and food for people in the church. The faith communities turned out. They were mucking houses, bringing lunch to people that worked. Hurricane Harvey was a really bad experience for a lot of people, and I admit that, but I'm telling you, I saw things in people's eyes that will last me a lifetime. They cared about their neighbor. We all sort of dream that we live in a community where people do that, and when we see it happening, it's marvelous. And we had people from Friendswood, we had people from Dickinson, we had people from Altaloma and Santa Fe and Galveston coming to get food and diapers. I never knew there was such a demand for diapers, but there were.
But when there's not a store open, there's nothing you can do. And so many of our family members and friends and so many of our coworkers were affected by this. And I look at so many of them that don't have a financial need ever. And in this situation, Harvey knew no financial need. Everybody needed help. There was no way to get food. So if you didn't have, if you couldn't leave your house, you couldn't. And so the community stepping up was really and truly out of necessity. I mean, it was a necessity to make sure that whether you had everything you needed the day before, there were freezers and refrigerators full of food just gone, wasted, and people couldn't eat it, just couldn't do anything about it. It was absolutely incredible. So how many, I know you guys both said about 25%. What would you say that you know of right now? Like, what is the recovery? I know you said you just finished your house. Mayor Hallisey, are you still working on your house?
No, we're back in.
Back in your house. So as far as your community, what would you say as far as recovery goes, how people are doing?
Well, we had 8,000 homes that were affected, and I would say out of the 8,000, probably 7,300 are back in their houses. They recovered relatively quick. There are some areas that are still struggling with it, and we're struggling right now and sending letters off to the governor and lieutenant governor because, FEMA money coming down here. I mean, Friendswood and League City we're going to be penalized because we don't have large, low to moderate income. And, the flood didn't they didn't care whether you were low to
It
moderate
was
income.
not a low to moderate income storm, and exactly like Mayor Hallisey said, we just signed a letter within the last 2 weeks asking for some help with that directive that 70% of the money has to go to low to moderate income areas, and that shuts us up both out. And so we have, like he said, a similar number of people are back in their homes, but we still have a lot of people that are waiting, because there have been buyout programs offered. We've applied for. So far, we haven't been successful, and we're waiting on the next round of buyouts and see if we can get some of these homes either bought out by the government or elevated by the government so that get some help. So it's hard if you own one of those homes to start putting money back into it while you're waiting to hear maybe the government's going to help. So, and I understand how a lot of people are kind of on the sidelines waiting. They're sort of paralyzed a little bit because they're waiting for the answer to come, and yes or no, but they need the answer so they can move on.
Did you get a call this weekend from George P. Bush?
I did not.
Well, we got one.
Good.
I wasn't there to take the call, but I listened to it on the deal, and he says that they're being successful at being able to lighten the HUD requirements. We're getting I forget what the term was Ken Clark used when he came and talked to us, but I think that help is going to be coming, and I think that's healthy and good.
That's good news. I had heard that the word was out, but we haven't seen anything in writing to officially declare that we're getting some relief on that ruling, because that will help us a lot.
So many people don't realize the length of time that it takes to recover from a storm, and so many people were just 10 years later recovering from Ike. And I know that rumors or things that I read on social media, so I always say that those are rumors until I actually research them, so I'm going to apologize for not doing as good of a research on this part. But with the buyout programs, I heard Friendswood was kind of affected for homes that had already been repaired, or they had been lifted after previous storms. Were they ineligible for buyout programs because of that, or?
I don't know about that. That's a question I can't answer. Sorry.
Okay. No, it's okay. I just was wondering, because I thought that was kind of interesting that if you had, from what I had seen, was that if you had done something to your home, like you said, that people are waiting for either a buyout or a lifting of the home, but if you had done it.
In the first buyout package that was offered, it was going to be a 90-10 buyout, meaning the government would pay 90% of the value of the home, and the local government would chip in 10%. We were ready to do that. We had 44 homes that we put on our list that submitted this package. And it was about a $12 or $13 million package that we were requesting. And the answer that came back said, you didn't get this thing. One of the homes that you submitted was not eligible. And we followed all the guidelines FEMA provided, when we submitted. Somehow a rule got changed, and we weren't told about the change. We weren't given the opportunity to pull this one home that became ineligible after the rule change out, and they just denied the package and said sorry. So we wish that, sometimes that they'd be a little more interactive with us and help us out when there's obviously a rule change that we were not even told about, but now we're
being held to
penalized for that. So that happened, and then there was another program where we submitted a package of about 24 homes for a 75-25 buyout that we haven't heard a result for yet.
So difficult, and you see so many of the homes, that people just, whether they didn't have flood insurance or that what they had wouldn't cover, they're just having to sell their homes as is because they just can't even complete the repairs, and so difficult, such a difficult situation to go through. So
the thing that I think Pat and I would both say is, hey, we are working this. I think a lot of people feel like, if the mayors would just say something, they could just make this problem go away. If they just, put their minds to it, they could fix it. Well, we're definitely trying everything we can. We're like he said, we sent a letter to Land Commissioner Bush, we sent letters to the governor. We're doing everything we can possibly do, aside from, making sure that the water gets out of League City, gets out of Friendswood into the creeks. After that, we don't control the creeks. We don't control the flow of the creeks. That's the flood districts, the Corps of Engineers, they have to make sure that the water is conveyed to the Gulf. As long as our drainage ditches and storm sewer lines are clear, we've done our job as cities, and we have to rely on other people to help us. So we're screaming to everybody that will listen. We need this help. Help us.
And that all boils down, and Mayor Foreman is right in that we have to build networks at state government of people who will help us. Mm-hmm. Networks, Randy Weber and anybody else that's in Pete Olson, the congressional people around here. We need their help, and we're not shy about asking for their help. I think the land office was, I've had a relationship with that land office for the last 30 years. They have always been a helpful state agency. But for some reason, during Ike and during this one, they have been somewhat of a hindrance to progress. And I know the governor and lieutenant governor, when they were here, were not happy with how the housing recovery was going. Everybody was committed to try to get the land commissioner to get on board with this, and I think he finally has. And he's brand new. Mm-hmm. We can slap our hands and say should have and would have and all this and that, but when he gets it, and the call I got from him the other day, he got it. So we still have people waiting on that funding. So I hope he brings it quickly.
Well, I'm definitely rooting for you guys, and I hope that our listeners, if anything they take away from this, is that you guys are trying. You're trying your best, and I know that as a resident, I appreciate it, and as an employee in a League City business, that we appreciate all that you guys are doing to help out the residents in the areas. You kind of started to talk a little bit about this, kind of the things that you're doing as far as government assistance, but what would be, if people out there, one of the things that surprised me after the storm was that after a couple of weeks, the trash started getting picked up. No longer was there, the smell or the obvious signs that we as a community were in distress, that people on the outside started going, well, I drove down 45 and it looked great. Oh, yeah, it looks great, but there's still a lot going on. So if if we have listeners in other communities what does your community still need? What are the the needs other than the government assistance? Is that kind of where we're at? Just that we need that government money? And
pretty much, what I chartered right after the storm, right after I became mayor, actually, we talked about it all through the campaign, was chartering a subcommittee to city council to look at what can we do, Friendswood do. We know we have to ask for all this help from outside, but we got a lot of smart people. We got a lot of smart citizens living in Friendswood and League City, So I chartered this subcommittee. There were 2 city council members, some city staff, Ken Clark, our commissioner, is on this thing, representatives from Greg Bonin's office, Larry Taylor's office are on this thing. And, they're putting their heads together and we got a lot of citizens from Friendswood that are on it, the smart people from Friendswood, of which, I'm not one, but we got a lot of smart people that, used to work for NASA and things like that. So they're sitting there and they're putting their heads together.
I definitely think you're in that category, but we'll...
Well, wait till you get to know me a little better. But so they're working diligently, and meeting weekly, and we've just hired a Rice professor to bring some of his students to bear on this problem and look at Friendswood from a flooding standpoint, and they can model this thing. And I'm an engineer, but I'm not a hydrology and hydraulics expert, but these guys are, and they're going to figure out some ideas that they can offer up. So we're doing a lot of things, and this committee is doing some magnificent work, kind of researching and finding out, analyzing the problem, and hopefully in a few months we'll have some answers from them, and hopefully the answers won't cost us more money than we actually have in our coffers to spend on it, because when Pat Hallisey mentioned the project that Ralph Lowe came up with in 1968, well, that project now to do on Clear Creek is about a $250-300 million project. I mean, it's nothing that any of our cities can afford. It's not even something we could put a bond together for that much money. That Harris County might be able to get a $2.5 billion bond, but we don't have enough taxpayers
To
to
do
float
that.
a
to
pond
be
that
able
big.
to do that.
So, you
Well, I'm
know,
excited to continue talking about the drainage systems, about the upcoming flood plan changes, and everything that the community is going through, and what they've done to rally together when we get back on Get Associated with Cathie. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. We are back with Get Associated with Cathie, ACU of Texas in the community, and we are talking with Mayor Foreman and Mayor Hallisey from Friendswood and League City, respectively. They are talking about all of the great things that are going on in the community and the drainage plans. I mentioned earlier the flood plots, and we talked about how good it is to have insurance, even if you aren't in one of those. But I do know that they've been working on redrawing that. Is that correct for both of your communities?
yes, and we've just adopted the most up-to-date flood maps in Friendswood, 2017 and 2018 flood maps for our Harris County and Galveston County, and actually a small sliver is still in the 2007 flood map. But we've adopted the most up-to-date maps so that people know what they're up against. You know, these maps. The more we see all this rain and get the data, the better the floodplain maps become. So we've adopted the most up-to-date. So for building going forward, you know, those are the maps that apply. And so I think we're doing the best thing for our citizens by adopting the most up-to-date maps.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, we actually started early before the maps were out. We elevated our base building elevation up almost 12 inches, and then we debated a little more, and we put it up almost to 2 feet. It's going to cost home builders a little more, and the cost of the house will be more. But we, as a group, decided it was easier to do it. We know it was coming, and we don't want to stand in front of 25% of our citizens next time and say, you know, we really didn't care much about flooding. So new development in League City and the 48% to go is going to have to build a much higher elevation.
And we had that same ordinance in place probably in Friendswood for almost 20 years. So we've already been, the homes that have been built in the last 20 years have already been built to that standard. But, you know, homes like in my neighborhood, you know, are a little older. And so
how does that affect the older neighborhoods? And I say that because I'm in a neighborhood that has got a new development. I'm excited about the new development because I'm hoping to move in there. But I hear so many times that people are just so anxious, and it's, you know, what from a city standpoint, what are you guys doing to help prevent the older homes from getting flooded?
You know, one thing that people don't understand, because a lot of times they'll point at development and say that's the reason for flooding. And no, not really, because all the developments that come through, you know, the city have to be approved, and they have to provide drainage plans. They have to show that because they built this shopping center or this big home, they're not affecting the flood, the drainage any negatively. They're still going to be able to drain that property just like they did before. So, you know, the thing that we do, of course, is continue to do is to analyze all these projects and make sure that new development's not causing any more problem than we had already. And in the situation you're talking about, Friendswood Trails, they have done a lot of work, you know, up front to make the drainage better. You know, in fact, in Sun Meadows, the neighborhood that they surround, basically, they're improving the drainage in Sun Meadow. So I think, you know, in Allison, Sun Meadow flooded, and I know we're talking about detailed neighborhoods here for folks that probably don't know what we're talking about.
I know, that's why I just kind of generalized it.
Yeah, so I'm not generalizing very well, but you know, Sun Meadow flooded back during Allison, but did not during Harvey, because, you know, I think a lot of the things that have been done, and not just with new development there, but with the drainage district putting in better culverts and better flow, you know, for that water, it's helped all the homes. So we just need to continue to do that.
One thing that I think as a resident would be, I don't know, I think it'd be fun, if I could use the word fun. I don't know if it's fun or more work, but as a resident, I know in our neighborhood, we have a Facebook page, and we talk to each other, and we're like, hey, are the drains clear? Don't forget, we have flash flooding. Are your drains clear? Go make sure that, you know, we have beautiful pine trees and all these great things in our neighborhood, but we don't realize what effect it has on our surrounding. And so, you know how people check in on Facebook when they're safe or whatever on Harvey? Wouldn't it be nice if we could have like all the drains and people be like, hey, I checked this drain, so you don't have to do it. And, you know, but just that constant reminder that sometimes some of these issues, unfortunately, are preventable by us just being good citizens.
I think the Next Door program is every neighborhood in our city, they're connected with one another, and then they're interconnected between the neighborhoods. And there was a lot of discussion 2 weeks ago during the flooding, who's flooded, what roads are closed, and we were learning pretty firsthand from residents out there of where it was safe to travel, where it was not safe to travel. I go back to much like Mayor Foreman. We commissioned 8 engineering studies the day after Harvey. We went to the hardest hit areas and we said, why are these flooding? And the new neighborhoods, the creek came out of its banks. It's hard to control. It's coming from upstream. But in a lot of those older neighborhoods, there is stuff we could do. We immediately cleared the storm drains. Bay Ridge is the one that comes to mind because Bay Ridge in 1979 was almost totally devastated with 42 inches of rain. They were almost devastated in this. It was a bad situation. And they say, what are you going to do? Well, we put a couple pumps up on the levee and we pump water out of the detention pond and to Gum Bayou, which runs down to Dickinson Bayou. It's clear as a bell until it hits Dickinson. At a church, preacher at a church sent me a note yesterday and said, all that water you put into Gum Bayou flooded my church. What are you going to do about it? I said, well, I got a city manager. He'll figure that out. But, the truth is you can't flood everybody else. So whatever you put in these bayous to relieve one problem has an unintended consequence downstream if you're not careful. So you have to be measured. We called public meetings after every engineering study that was done. We shared with the neighborhood what the findings were, what the potential solutions were. And, about this point, we're looking at probably $30 or $40 million to do what the studies we know about. Now, we haven't started because we still have 4 of them that are ongoing, and we've got a couple additional that we've added. Our plan is to get all the engineering studies in, get them all around the table, take a look at what looks doable and what looks doable now, and what can we do to start chipping away. I talk about the mayor's roundtable that Mayor Foreman's part of. The Clear Creek project and doing something about Clear Creek is imperative to all of us. What we do with Clear Creek, we could use a little advice from the engineering folks, just dumping water there or taking half a Seabrook out so there's a bigger flow rate there probably isn't going to happen, but we need to look at how. Equally as important to both of us is Dickinson Bayou because our growth areas are pretty much in the Dickinson watershed. And Dickinson backs up. What backs it up? We know that the bridges, or at least in my neighborhood, the I-45 bridge and the access roads backed it up pretty bad. And when it backs up in my neighborhood, it goes right back up the creek and affects people in your neighborhood. When the tide goes out, there goes the water. It is a perplexing problem. It is a regional problem to try to solve. I think Lake City and Friendswood do an exceptional job of getting water out of their communities to the creek. But our real holdup is the creek and Dickinson Bayou. What can we do? The environmentalists in the mid-'80s said, we're just not going to lose that riparian forest all along Clear Creek. We got alligators, we got wolves, we got all kinds of wildlife there, and we don't want to destroy it. I'm sort of a believer, and I learned this in dealing with a lot of the coastal issues that I used to deal with. There is a way to get it done, but you have to get all the parties, pro and con, at the table. You have to see what the problems are. Once you see what the problems are, you can chip away at solving them. I don't want to destroy that riparian forest. That's a neat place up and down Clear Creek. And there is a lot of wildlife. We don't have to dredge the creek to a certain depth and kill everything on the sides. There are ways to do this. And I think until, and I know really the leader we don't have drainage districts like Mike does in Friendswood. That's an arm of, it's a sub, I call it a sub-level of city government and county government that deals with drainage issues. It's been proposed, maybe the north end ought to talk about one large drainage district where, you get enough people paying in, we actually could do something instead of waiting on the federal government. They're already desnagging Clear Creek up in their area. I mean, they've taken a very proactive stand on what to do, and I think that sets a standard for the rest of us. They got a barge out there, they got a machine that goes and takes the not the trees. I don't want to say trees, people will be calling here. Takes the undergrowth out of the way, so water can flow more evenly. I think what's happening in the north end of Galveston County is unique because we are finally, and it's probably the first time ever that we actually are talking from institution to institution. Elected officials are talking. I don't want to call them bureaucrats, but employees are talking that know a lot more than he and I know about how to deal with this stuff. And I think from that, Ken Clark may be right. I don't want another taxing entity, but I don't want to face those people that are flooded either. So I'm open to all suggestions.
Well, that's wonderful. One of the things that I've noticed as a community member that every flood has brought some positives. So, or any natural disaster that we've dealt with, there has been improvements, whether it be the communication by text now or evacuation plans. In your backyard, Mayor Hallisey, the Texas, New Mexico being able to get out and get the electricity back on a lot faster. Yeah, sure. I mean, I remember coming home from Ike, and I think we were about 5 or 6 days in, and we still had a couple of days without electricity. And this time, we were fortunate not to lose, but people who did lose electricity, I feel like got it back on a lot faster. What do you feel like from this storm? What are going to be what's one major thing that you feel like is going to improve?
Well, in Friendswood, one thing that we found out that we had all of our city equipment on one side of the creek. And now the creek floods, and it's flooded for 5 days, and we have no way to get our equipment to homeowners, to streets, wherever we need on the other side of the creek. So we had that problem. So we've we've acquired property on the other side of the creek where now we will stage equipment, and so that's something that you learn, and it sometimes it takes a disaster like this to show you that these problems exist. So we're doing that. I think we're going to learn a lot from this. I'm looking forward to this subcommittee that we chartered and see awesome. What they're going to come out with, because I think they are going to come out with some ideas that we're going to say, hadn't thought of that. That's a good idea. We should be doing that. So
many little things that people don't think about. I know in the business world, you saw a lot of direct deposit after Ike because people didn't have paychecks on the road. And so then it was a requirement all of a sudden. You have to have direct deposit so we can get you money while you are evacuated for a storm.
I think the biggest thing that's happened in our community, we'll be prepared. People will be prepared to help one another. We saw it happening. I think they'll be prepared. They're paying very close attention to what happens with flooding. They all realize government's not the only answer to it. Their involvement is a big part of what government's going to do, and we're hearing. We're hearing from people. They want something done in the low-lying areas, and we agree with them. We're trying to figure out what to do. Unfortunately, we just can't go do something, spend millions and millions of dollars and make a mistake. They won't stand for that either. But I think they'll be prepared. I think they'll know where to go for help if it ever happens again. And I hope the great thing about it is the East Coast gets plummeted with rain, that we learn that those that help us, we have to pay it forward, we have to pay it back. And there's discussions in our community about sending tractor trailers over to the East Coast. So
that's great.
We have communities with a heart. We've always known that.
We do, and that's one thing that I saw with Alvin ISD, which is a community really close to both of ours. And they did the day, which was a day that all the school district went out. There's 300 projects that took place. So we don't have time to talk about what you guys are going to do to continue with volunteerism, but I hope that there is something that you guys take out of this that we can do as a community. And I'd be willing to help in both your communities do something to continue that spirit that we saw come from Ike. I'm so glad to hear of all the great things going on to improve in the last year, and that so many are back in their home and going forward. So I want to thank you both for coming on the show and talking to me, and I wish you guys a great day and a great
Thank you.
year.
Thanks,
Thanks, Cathie. Appreciate it.
Thank you.